When an organization decides a model is close to useful but not quite aligned with its needs, the temptation is to tweak it until it behaves the way people want. That tweaking is often called fine-tuning, and it can be a powerful way to adapt an artificial intelligence (AI) model to a specific domain, style, or set of tasks. Fine-tuning can also be one of the fastest ways to accidentally create new security problems because you are changing behavior in a system that already influences decisions. Beginners sometimes imagine fine-tuning as a gentle polish, like adjusting settings on a device. But in reality, it is a learning process that can alter what the model remembers, what it prioritizes, and how it reacts to inputs. If you understand a few core ideas, epochs, learning rates, and catastrophic forgetting, you can reason about fine-tuning as a controlled risk decision rather than a hopeful experiment. That is exactly the kind of thinking security AI Plus is trying to develop. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Fine-tuning is a form of additional training that starts from an existing model and continues learning using a narrower dataset related to the target use case. The reason people do it is efficiency, because the model already knows general patterns, and fine-tuning is meant to nudge it toward better performance on your specific tasks. In security terms, this can mean improving how the model summarizes incidents, classifies events, understands internal terminology, or follows organizational policy language. The benefit is that a tuned model can be more consistent and less generic, which can reduce errors caused by vague or mismatched outputs. The risk is that tuning changes the model's behavior in ways that may not be obvious from a quick demo, especially when the model interacts with real users and real data. A tuned model might become more confident, more brittle, or more likely to reveal sensitive information because it learned patterns from the tuning data. Fine-tuning is not automatically good or bad, but it is a change that deserves the same caution you would apply to any security-relevant system update. To fine-tune safely, you need a simple mental picture of what training does. Training adjusts internal parameters to reduce error on the training examples, which means the model gradually reshapes itself to match the patterns it sees. Fine-tuning uses that same mechanism, but the dataset is smaller and more specific, so the model can shift more quickly toward those new patterns. This shift is why fine-tuning can improve performance on narrow tasks, but it is also why it can break general abilities or create unexpected behaviors. If the fine-tuning examples contain biased phrasing, sloppy labels, or unsafe content, the model can absorb those issues and produce them later. If the fine-tuning data is too similar to the evaluation data, you can fool yourself into thinking the model improved when it's simply memorized. A defender-friendly view is that fine-tuning is reprogramming through examples, and the examples are part of the attack surface. Once you accept that, it becomes natural to ask who controlled the examples and how you know they represent safe, intended behavior. Epochs are one of the first tuning concepts you will hear, and they sound technical until you realize they are just a counting idea. An epoch is one full pass through the training dataset during learning, meaning the model has seen every example once. More epochs generally mean the model has more opportunity to fit the training data, which can improve performance up to a point. After that point, more epochs can push the model into overfitting, where it starts learning noise and quirks that won't generalize. In security use cases, overfitting is not just a performance issue, it is a reliability issue, because a brittle model can fail under real-world variation or adversarial inputs. Too many epochs can also increase the risk that sensitive details in the tuning data become baked into the model's behavior, especially if the data includes unique identifiers or rare phrases. Beginners sometimes think more epochs always means better learning, but safe tuning treats epochs as a knob that must be balanced against generalization and leakage risk. The right number is not a moral value. It is a controlled choice supported by evaluation. Learning rate is another core knob, and it influences how big of a step the model takes when adjusting its parameters in response to error. A high learning rate means the model changes quickly, which can speed up learning but can also make training unstable overshoot good solutions, or cause sudden behavior shifts. A low learning rate means the model changes slowly, which can be more stable but may require more time and may fail to adapt sufficiently with limited training. In a security context, this stability matters because sudden shifts can produce new failure modes that weren't present before, like increased sensitivity to certain inputs or degraded compliance with constraints. Learning rate interacts with epochs because many small steps over many epochs can still cause large overall change, and a few large steps can cause a dramatic shift early. The beginner trap is treating learning rate as an internal engineering detail that doesn't affect risk, when it directly affects how predictable the tuning outcome will be. Safe fine-tuning acknowledges that the speed of learning is also the speed of unintended change, so learning rate should be chosen with caution and verified through rigorous testing rather than vibes. Now we arrive at catastrophic forgetting, which is one of the most important risks to understand because it describes a failure that can look like progress at first. Catastrophic forgetting is when a model that is fine-tuned on a narrow dataset loses some of its broader capabilities, essentially forgetting things it used to do well. This happens because learning is not additive in a simple way. The model's parameters are being adjusted, and those adjustments can overwrite representations that supported earlier skills. In practical terms, you might tune a model to be better at your organization's terminology, but it might become worse at general reasoning, safety behaviors, or handling inputs that fall outside the narrow domain. In security workflows, that can be dangerous because a model might lose the ability to recognize risky requests, maintain stable caution, or follow previously reliable constraints. Beginners sometimes misread forgetting as the model becoming more focused and therefore better, but focus that erases essential safety and generalization is not a win. A defender sees catastrophic forgetting as a regression risk that requires targeted evaluation, especially on safety-critical behaviors that must not degrade. A safe tuning approach starts with disciplined data selection because the tuning dataset is effectively a set of lessons you are teaching the model. If the dataset is made from real incidents, internal documents, or support tickets, it may contain sensitive information, and fine-tuning on that information can increase the chance of leakage through outputs. Even if the model does not repeat content word for word, it can reveal patterns, names, or internal phrasing that should not be exposed. The dataset can also contain adversarial content if attackers were involved in earlier interactions, which is common in security because many logs and tickets include attacker-controlled inputs. Teaching the model from attacker-controlled content without careful filtering is like training a guard dog using recordings made by the burglar. Another important point is representativeness. If your dataset is too narrow, you amplify catastrophic forgetting and overfitting, and if it is too broad, you may not achieve the alignment you wanted. Safe tuning balances domain specificity with enough diversity to preserve general capability, and it treats sensitive and untrusted text as a primary governance concern. Labeling and supervision matter even when tuning seems straightforward, because the model learns from whatever signal you provide. If you are fine-tuning for safer behavior, you need examples that clearly demonstrate what safe behavior looks like, not just examples of what you want the model to talk about. If you are fine-tuning for consistency in incident summaries, you need examples that reflect careful uncertainty language and verification habits, not summaries that pretend to know everything. In security, the worst habit a model can learn is confident guessing, because confident guessing can turn into confident bad decisions downstream. A beginner might assume the model will naturally remain cautious, but tuning can reshape that tone and that decision posture. This is why quality control on training examples is not cosmetic, it is safety critical. A dataset full of shortcuts, sloppy conclusions, or overshared details will teach the model those behaviors, and then you will be surprised when it produces them at scale. Fine-tuning is learning by imitation, so you must be intentional about what you demonstrate. Evaluation during and after tuning should be designed to catch the exact risks that tuning introduces, not just to celebrate improvements. That means you test on a holdout set that represents the target tasks, but you also test on broader and safety-focused checks that detect catastrophic forgetting. For example, if the model is used in a security context, you want to confirm it still behaves responsibly when asked for risky guidance, when given ambiguous evidence, or when asked to summarize data that includes sensitive items. You also want to verify that changes didn't quietly harm precision or recall in a detection task, or increase false positives to an operationally unacceptable level. Another defender-oriented evaluation habit is to compare before and after behavior on a fixed set of scenarios so you can see what truly changed. Without this, teams often accept improvements in one area while missing regressions elsewhere, which is how unsafe changes slip into production. A tuned model must earn trust through evidence, and that evidence must include stability, not just one new capability. Change control is a security control that becomes even more important in fine-tuning because behavior changes are less predictable than typical software changes. When you tune, you should be able to answer basic governance questions, like who approved the dataset, who approved the objective, and who approved the model version for serving. You should also be able to revert, meaning you need versioning and rollback plans that allow you to return to a known safer model if new behaviors appear. Rollback is not a sign of failure. It is a sign you are treating the model like an operational component with risk. Another change control concern is access to the tuning pipeline, because if attackers can influence tuning data or tuning runs, they can create intentional forgetting or intentional vulnerabilities. Fine-tuning pipelines often require privileged access to data and compute, which makes them attractive targets. A defender thinks about the tuning pipeline as part of the broader security boundary, with access controls, audit logs, and integrity checks, because the pipeline is the factory where behavior is manufactured. It is also important to understand that fine-tuning can change how a model responds to adversarial prompting, even if the tuning goal had nothing to do with security. A model tuned to be more helpful in a domain might become more willing to follow instructions, which can reduce resistance to unsafe requests. A model tuned on internal writing might pick up stylistic cues that make its output sound more authoritative, which can increase the harm of mistakes. A model tuned on narrow content might become easier to steer because it has fewer balanced representations to pull from, which can make it more vulnerable to manipulation. These effects can feel surprising if you expect tuning to only affect the intended task, but learning changes the internal landscape, and that can shift multiple behaviors at once. This is why defenders prefer layered controls rather than relying solely on model behavior, because even a well-tuned model can be coerced by cleverly crafted inputs. Exam scenarios might describe a tuned system that begins producing riskier content or leaking details, and the safest response often includes reviewing tuning data, validating safety behaviors, and tightening context exposure and access control rather than simply tweaking output wording. Another common misconception is that catastrophic forgetting only affects advanced skills, but it can also affect simple safety posture. For example, a model might stop qualifying uncertainty, stop asking for missing context, or stop separating verified facts from inferences, and those are subtle shifts that can lead to operational mistakes. In security environments, those subtle shifts matter because decisions are often made from incomplete evidence, and a model that speaks as if everything is certain can mislead humans. Another misconception is that a higher learning rate is always faster and therefore better, when speed without stability can create unpredictable regressions that are hard to diagnose. A third misconception is that more epochs always means more mastery, when it can mean more memorization and more leakage. When you correct these misunderstandings, you naturally start viewing fine-tuning as a careful experiment with controls rather than as a quick customization step. The exam will reward that defensive posture because it aligns with real risk management. Change is where you break things, so you treat change as a controlled event. To connect all of this to the lifecycle state thinking you learned previously, fine-tuning sits at the boundary between training and serving and can repeat multiple times across a model's operational life. Each tuning cycle should have clear entry criteria, like a well-defined gap in behavior, and clear exit criteria, like stable improvements demonstrated on holdout data without unacceptable regressions. Those criteria should also include security-specific checks, such as no increased leakage risk, no degraded safety behavior, and no unexpected sensitivity to input variations. This is where epochs and learning rate become governance tools, because they define how aggressive the behavior change is allowed to be. A defender's perspective is that tuning is not just about performance. It is about controlled adaptation under uncertainty. If you cannot explain what changed and why it is safer, You should not deploy the tune model into a workflow that affects real security outcomes. That stance can feel conservative, but in security, conservatism is often the difference between a controlled evolution and a preventable incident. The most useful way to hold these ideas in your head is to translate them into a simple, spoken safety narrative. Fine-tuning is additional learning that adapts a model to a narrower purpose, and it can improve usefulness while also changing behavior in unexpected ways. Epochs describe how many times the model studies the dataset, which affects how strongly it absorbs patterns and how likely it is to overfit. Learning rate describes how quickly it changes per lesson, which affects stability and the chance of sudden regressions. Catastrophic forgetting is the risk that the model loses important previous capabilities or safety posture because the new learning overwrites old patterns. When you combine those ideas with security habits like clean data governance, honest evaluation, change control, monitoring, and rollback, you have a defensible approach to tuning. That approach is what Security AI Plus is aiming for. Not fear of tuning, but disciplined tuning with clear boundaries. If you can explain these concepts clearly and connect them to risk, you are ready for the kinds of scenario questions that ask what went wrong after a model update and what a responsible defender would do next.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.